Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Hi, I'm Gabe Lyons. Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. It's Christmas season, and we're pretty excited around the Q office with our Christmas tree up, Christmas music playing. It's kind of a fun time of the year. And as we think about Christmas, I want you to be aware of a special that you have the opportunity to participate in because you're a listener of this podcast. We know from just hearing from so many of our podcast listeners, at some point, maybe you've come to the actual Q conference that we do every April, nationwide, really a global event now, over 2,000 leaders coming in, almost 10% from international global cities to really have this deep dive conversation about where faith sits in our cultural moment, what the future of the culture looks like, and how being a Christian and actually practicing our faith can participate in what God's trying to do in the world in this very moment. Obviously, we do that through a number of talks, over 35 different talks, some 9 minutes, 18 minutes, lots of discussions, breakout conversations, roundtable conversation. It's just an amazing event with so much energy around it. And I don't really like going to conferences, but when we created Q, we tried to create a space where the leader who's busy, who has a lot going on, who doesn't necessarily have time, quote unquote, to go to a conference, would actually come and feel so filled up by what took place during these 2.5 days that they would go back really enriched and knowing they couldn't have invested their time better. As you think about the new year, I want you to think about putting on your calendar April 24th to 26th in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's just going to be a great few days. And if you decide now to join us, here's what we're doing. If you purchase 2 tickets, so don't come alone, come with someone else. That's a critical rule of being a part of Q, is you got to bring somebody along that's going to actually carry these conversations forward, either in your industry, your network, maybe even locally in your organization or your church. We're going to give you several gifts if you make that decision in December as just our way of incenting you to, number one, get it on your calendar because I know you're busy. But number two, just to add value to you and encourage you, we've got several great gifts. We've got an album from Sleeping at Last, Christmas album. That's a beautiful album. Ryan O'Neal, just a beautiful voice, but that's part of it. We've got a candle, sweatshirt. We've got this beautiful prayer book called Canyon Road that's meant a lot to Rebecca and I that we just want you to have as a gift as part of this because we know in the busyness of life, sometimes just having a book that you can grab that's beautiful, sitting right there on the coffee table or maybe your nightstand, where when you're in a moment of crisis or a need and you just have 3 minutes that you want to pray, it just gives you a great guide with over 500 pages of different prayers, historic prayers, new prayers that have been written, scripture. It's just a great thing to have. And then finally, a full focus planner. This is from our friend Mike Hyatt, who really helps instruct leaders on how to take advantage of reaching their goals and writing them down physically, not just digitally, but physically using pencil or pen and paper inside this great planner, along with an online guide to help you know how to best use it, how to get the most out of it as you start the beginning of this next year. So think about all of that. I want to introduce, though, this talk that just took place this last year at our Q event. It was by Bobette Buster, and she's amazing. She's like a story guru. She's worked with so many different companies, Pixar, Disney Animation, the Disney Channel, Sony Animation. She's somebody who understands the power of story. And in understanding the power of story, something that she grappled with, that she brought out at this year's Q conference, was looking at our culture and realizing that few people actually are listening anymore. We do a lot of talking, we do a lot of grandstanding, we put our points of view out in social media, we say what we think, and we think that's all we need to do. We don't understand that the actual power comes when we listen to the other, when we know how to develop that skill. Let's listen in now for 9 minutes as Bobette Buster helps us better understand the art of listening.
Thing about listening is we either approach it from 2 points of view, resentment or astonishment. We'll say, that person made me listen. I couldn't believe it. Or, you never listened to me. Or, with astonishment, that person really knows how to listen. The fact is, we have made it a cultural norm now to be multitasking as we're listening to someone and we look at a multi-screen any screen in our lives, whether that's a phone or a TV screen. Listening is not a passive experience. It's active. It's intentional. You are giving someone your time. It's a gracious act. It's generous. And it only happens in time. It is the bastion of manners that we give each other. And frankly, it's the only way culture moves forward. It was J.K. Rowling who said, "No story lives unless someone wants to listen." And then it was Maya Angelou who said, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And that's the world we're in now with Black Lives Matters and Me Too movement. All these stories held within for generations, they are like a cancer or uranium about to explode. And it was Ronan Farrell who broke through in the New Yorker article last fall of all the women who had been harassed, even raped by Harvey Weinstein. And he spoke about this in January in the Hollywood Reporter. He said, "My mandate was never to believe all the survivors, it was to listen to all the survivors. It's completely possible to be both a skeptical, judicious reporter and also create a space for survivors to be heard. If that inspires people to activism, then it's a job well done." Well, as we know from this event, there was a virtual tsunami, a cascade effect of women finally toppling men in power from sexual harassment motives that they had. There was a moment with Louis C.K., the comedian, who actually, unlike most of the men, came forward and said, "What you've heard is true." And so now, I will step aside and listen. Listen suddenly has become a noble gesture, a moment, an offering to society. When Gayle King went on Stephen Colbert the day that Charlie Rose was fired from CBS Morning News and lost his PBS show, she was flummoxed. She was so upset because Charlie Rose was a very good friend of hers. And finally, Stephen Colbert said, "What do you want?" And she said, just listen to us. And that has become the mantra of the Me Too movement. In fact, I believe it's presaged a new era of civility and a possibility. But how do we get there? Just this week, Madeleine Albright, US Secretary of State in the Clinton era, said, "To recognize what democracy is about, it's based on an active citizenship. People who know what they have to do, are informed, have a good education, and they listen to one another." Okay, so how do you listen? What is the act of listening? Because we've almost lost that art. You know, it was Harper Lee in the groundbreaking, beautiful book, To Kill a Mockingbird, who wrote these lines and put them into the mouth of Atticus Finch. He said to his daughter Scout, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." Well, I'm going to show you something here. It's a scene from CNN from December 2017. As you all recall, in August of last year, there was a neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville, Virginia. There was a counter-protest. A man who sympathized with the neo-Nazis drove a car into a group of counter-protesters and killed a young woman, Heather Heyer. This scene happened at the courthouse in December.
To Charlottesville.
You can't do anything in this town!
But in the midst of those trying to scream down hate, a rare occurrence.
What's going on, man? How you doing?
Daryl Davis, a blues musician, and an imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan agree to meet and find common ground.
As Americans, your Confederate history is as much a part as my black history is a part of yours.
It is.
And it's time that we got to know one another.
You're exactly right.
So how do we convince? Look, you know, we can spend all our life arguing, or we can move forward.
You know as well as I do, my organization has a bad history.
But their meeting wasn't welcomed by some.
Let me ask you a question.
No, do not ask me a question about racist.
Well, then you have none.
He says
Davis says he does and has the KKK robes to prove it. How many of these robes have you gotten handed to you by Klansmen?
I probably have about maybe 44, 45.
Wait, how many robes have you gotten from the Klansmen?
About 44, 45. And Klanswomen.
And Klanswomen?
Correct.
Who have said what?
They're done. As a result of
As a result, he says his process is that he just listens. And he says it takes place over time. He says that meeting he had with Billy Snuffer, he said on that day, who was the Imperial Wizard, he said, so it begins. Now, the NAACP is not fond of his motives, but Daryl Davis does this as a private citizen. He steps into the fray and starts a conversation, and he said, but it begins with listening, and he finds common ground. Now, there's a process called the Oxford process, which I write about in my book. It's by an organization based in the UK, and they bring together the most polarized people from like Israel and Palestine. They put them in a different setting, usually a beautiful setting, good food. Everyone must treat each other courteously, and they have to seek common ground, which is to say, how's the weather? How many children do you have? Anything. And then both sides are allowed to speak and must be listened to for an equal amount of time. And then each side paraphrases what they've heard. What you will expect is an aha moment. However slight or faint, something will happen. But it's important they must take turns. They must try to understand, not judge or interrupt. Sometimes you need a third party. But what you will discover is humility. You may even ask for forgiveness. This can be done with just your ordinary daily life when you have friction or you just don't feel like you're understood by someone in your own life. People you work with, a life partner, your children. What if you took 5 minutes and listened and then just paraphrase back what they say back and forth? It's Leonard Cohen who said, there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. But it was Carl Rogers, the eminent American psychologist, who came up with this in the 1950s. He said, if you really understand another person, if you really spend the time to understand their point of view without any attempt to make evaluative judgments, you run the risk of being changed yourself. And for the great majority of us, listening can seem to be too dangerous. So the first requirement is the courage to be able to change yourself. Are you willing? Well, it was G.K. Chesterton who said, never underestimate the 5-minute conversation with a 16-year-old boy. You might just change their life. But I would say today that it really comes down to the 5-minute session where you listen to the 16-year-old boy or someone else. It's a gift of time, because being heard is so close to being loved that for most people, they are almost indistinguishable. For those who have ears, let them hear. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing Bobette Buster just share with us about the art of listening. I do want to encourage you. She actually has a book called Do Listen, okay? Do listen, understand what's really being said, find a new way forward. That just released this fall, and it's a wonderful book that just takes these ideas even to a new level, and I hope it encourages you. Don't forget, go to qideas.org/2019. So qideas.org/2019, where you can learn more about the Q conference taking place April 24th to 26th in Nashville. You can also register 2 or more, and we're going to send you all these great gifts when you do that in December. Invite a friend, join us. Can't wait to meet you. Hope you have a great week.